big, dad and husband, and lots of ladies are always like, when is Leo gonna play that role in real life?
Right. I never really talk about that stuff.
It doesn't interest you at all?
No, I just never talk about those things.
He has stood on more stages than almost any actor alive, holding statues, shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers, addressing the United Nations about the fate of the planet. He has been photographed on every continent, in every kind of light, always composed, always in control of the image the world receives. And yet, if you ask people who study fame for a living, who study what it does to a person over 5 decades, many of them will tell you the same uncomfortable thing. Leonardo DiCaprio's life looks, from the outside, like a complete success story, and feels, by every available account, like something far more complicated underneath. This is not a story about a man who failed. It is a story about what winning costs when you spend 51 years refusing to stop competing. To understand the contradiction at the center of DiCaprio's life, you have to go back to where it started, because almost nothing about his adult psychology makes sense without it. Leonardo Wilhelm DiCaprio was born in 1974 and spent his early childhood in a section of Los Angeles that bore little resemblance to the glamorous address its name suggested. The neighborhood around Hollywood Boulevard in that era was not a postcard. It was a place where poverty, drug activity, and instability were part of the daily backdrop, not an occasional disruption. His parents separated when he was very young, and his mother, Ermeline, took on the work of raising him largely on her own, often holding down multiple jobs simply to keep the household running. His father, George, an underground comic artist with a countercultural streak, remained part of his life, but not as a constant, stabilizing presence in the home. Children who grow up in financially unstable households with an absent or inconsistent parent often develop one of two responses: withdrawal or an intense, almost compulsive drive to perform, to be good enough, impressive enough, undeniable enough that nobody could ever consider leaving again. By every account of his early career, young Leonardo chose the second path, and he chose it with a single-mindedness that would define the rest of his life. He started auditioning as a child, riding buses across Los Angeles with his mother to rooms full of other hopeful families, absorbing rejection after rejection. Casting directors found him too rough, too unconventional, not the polished look they wanted for commercials and sitcoms. By his early teens, he landed a recurring role on the sitcom Growing Pains, which brought in steady income and national visibility, but also did something else. It built a box around him. Audiences began to see him as the cute kid from a network comedy, a category that working actors often find suffocating because it is built on charm rather than craft, and charm has an expiration date. DiCaprio understood that instinctively, even as a teenager. While the sitcom aired, he pursued film roles with an intensity that surprised people around him. In 1993, at 18, he was cast in This Boy's Life opposite Robert De Niro, playing a teenager enduring an abusive stepfather. Critics took notice immediately. That same year, his performance as a young man with an intellectual disability in What's Eating Gilbert Grape earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He was 19 years old, nominated alongside performers decades into their careers, and the industry began to talk about him not as a teen idol but as a serious actor, perhaps one of the most promising of his generation. He did not win that year. The award went to Tommy Lee Jones for The Fugitive. But something had been set in motion that would shape the next 3 decades of his life. At 19, DiCaprio had tasted the Academy's recognition, and from that point forward, every year without it would feel, at least internally, like regression rather than simply the normal rhythm of a career. In 1997, James Cameron's Titanic was released, and nothing about DiCaprio's career, or his life, would ever be ordinary again. The film became, at the time, the highest-grossing movie ever made, eventually crossing $2 billion worldwide and sweeping 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. DiCaprio, playing Jack Dawson, became arguably the most recognizable face on the planet almost overnight. Magazine covers, fan mail by the truckload, a level of mainstream adoration that few actors in history have experienced. It should have been the beginning of an unstoppable run. Instead, it nearly ended his credibility as an actor. The industry, and to some extent the public, struggled to separate DiCaprio from Jack Dawson. Despite his work in Gilbert Grape and This Boy's Life, casting directors and critics increasingly saw him through the lens of teen idol romantic lead rather than serious dramatic performer. The Academy, which had awarded Titanic itself 11 Oscars, did not nominate DiCaprio in any acting category for his performance in it. The message, whether intentional or not, was clear. commercial success of that scale and critical respect did not automatically travel together, and certainly not for him. What followed was nearly 2 decades of deliberate, visible effort to escape the box that Titanic had built around him. He turned down obvious commercial roles. He sought out difficult, often unglamorous parts with serious directors: Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, Alejandro Inarritu, Quentin Tarantino. Between 1993 and 2015, DiCaprio earned several more Academy Award nominations: for The Aviator in 2004, in which he played the brilliant and psychologically unraveling Howard Hughes, and for The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013, an unrestrained, physically demanding performance as real-life fraudster Jordan Belfort. Critics frequently called these performances among the best of their respective years. Each time the nomination came, each time another actor's name was read instead. By 2014, this pattern had become so consistent that it stopped being simply an industry footnote and became a cultural phenomenon in its own right. Photographs of DiCaprio applauding politely while someone else accepted the award circulated endlessly online. Late-night television hosts built recurring bits around it. The idea that Leo will never win an Oscar became, briefly, one of the most widely repeated jokes in American pop culture. It is worth pausing here because the joke obscured something genuinely difficult underneath it. People who worked alongside DiCaprio during this stretch of his career have described in various interviews over the years a man who took his craft with total seriousness and who did not take the losses lightly, despite his carefully composed public remarks suggesting otherwise. Whether or not he ever said so directly, the pattern of his subsequent role choices, increasingly extreme, increasingly punishing, increasingly built around physical and psychological transformation, suggests a man searching for a performance so undeniable that recognition could no longer be withheld. EB 2015, DiCaprio was 40 years old, had 4 Academy Award nominations to his name, and had never won. That year, he committed to a film that would test him in ways few major Hollywood productions ever attempt to test their stars. The Revenant, directed by Alejandro Inarritu, told the story of Hugh Glass, a 19th-century frontiersman left for dead after a bear attack, who crawls and claws his way across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness to survive. The production became almost as famous as the film itself for the conditions under which it was shot. Filming took place largely in remote parts of Canada and Argentina, using only natural light, which meant the crew often had only a narrow window of usable daylight each day. The shoot, originally planned to last several months, stretched on for nearly a year as the production chased shrinking patches of snow and difficult weather. The budget reportedly swelled well past $100 million. Numerous crew members left the project rather than continue enduring the brutal conditions. DiCaprio's own physical commitment to the role became part of Hollywood legend. He filmed scenes submerged in icy rivers. He reportedly ate raw bison liver for one sequence. He slept inside the carcass of an animal for another. He later described the production, in interviews given at the time, as among the most physically demanding experiences of his career. Whatever the precise details of any single anecdote, the broader picture is not disputed. This was an actor pushing his body to genuine extremes, in punishing conditions, for a role that many close observers understood, even if he never said it outright, was as much about answering 22 years of unanswered nominations as it was about Hugh Glass. On February 28, 2016, at the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, Julianne Moore opened the envelope for Best Actor and read his name. The room rose in a standing ovation that, by most accounts, felt different from the usual polite applause reserved for a popular winner. It carried the particular relief of an audience that had been waiting alongside him. DiCaprio's acceptance speech focused not on himself, but on climate change, using the platform to push an issue he had spent years championing. What makes this moment worth examining closely, rather than treating it as a simple happy ending, is what came after. Several people who knew DiCaprio at the time have described, in subsequent interviews and profiles, a kind of quiet anticlimax in the weeks following the win. Not regret, not disappointment exactly, but a sense that the achievement did not produce the emotional resolution he may have expected after 2 decades of chasing it. This is, of course, a familiar psychological pattern, one well documented far beyond Hollywood. When a goal becomes the organizing principle of a person's identity for long enough, achieving it rarely delivers the internal shift the person was hoping for, because the problem was never really the absence of the trophy. The Oscar did not undo the years of public mockery, and it did not retroactively answer the deeper question that had been driving him since he was a teenage boy riding buses to auditions, the question of whether he was finally enough. A pattern the public will not stop watching if DiCaprio's professional story is one of an external trophy finally arriving too late to resolve an internal need. His personal life has become the subject of an entirely different and considerably more uncomfortable kind of public scrutiny. For roughly 3 decades, DiCaprio's romantic relationships have followed a publicly documented and remarkably consistent pattern. Figures including Bridget Hall in the mid-1990s, Gisele Bündchen for several years around the turn of the millennium, and later Barafali, Aaron Hetherton, Tony Garn, Kelly Rohrbach, Nina Agdal, and Camila Morrone, among others, have all been linked to him publicly. Commentators and casual observers alike have repeatedly pointed out that nearly every one of these relationships involve a partner in roughly the same narrow age range, generally in her early to mid-20s, regardless of DiCaprio's own age at the time, and that many of these relationships appear to end around the time the partner approached or passed 25. This pattern became impossible to ignore as a piece of internet culture in 2022, when his relationship with Camila Morrone ended not long after her 25th birthday. Online communities, most visibly on Reddit, constructed charts plotting DiCaprio's age against the ages of his publicly known partners across 3 decades. His own age climbed steadily upward from his mid-20s toward 50. The age range of his partners, by contrast, stayed remarkably flat across that same period. The internet, with its usual mixture of humor and genuine critique, nicknamed it Leo's Law, and has remained a recurring subject of commentary ever since. It's worth being careful and fair here. Every adult relationship involves 2 consenting adults, and DiCaprio's defenders have rightly pointed out that media commentary often treats male celebrities' dating histories with a kind of breezy fascination that would read very differently, and far more critically, if the genders were reversed or if the same scrutiny were applied evenly across the industry. At the same time, the sheer consistency of the pattern, sustained across 30 years and many separate relationships, is part of why it continues to generate discussion rather than fading as a one-time curiosity. Some commentators have framed it as evidence of arrested emotional development, the theory being that a man who became globally famous at 23, frozen in the public imagination at that exact age and that exact level of stardom, may have struggled to grow alongside that image in the way that ordinary life requires. Others point to the basic power imbalance inherent in any relationship between a man with decades of fame, wealth, and industry influence and a partner significantly younger and earlier in her own life and career. Both readings have circulated widely, and DiCaprio himself has, by all public record, never directly addressed the pattern in any sustained or reflective way. It is also worth noting, in fairness, that his current relationship with Italian model Vittoria Soretti, who turned 26 in 2024, has been cited by some entertainment commentators as a possible departure from the historical pattern, even if it remains too early to say definitively whether that holds. The silence itself has become part of the broader cultural conversation around him, not necessarily because silence implies guilt or wrongdoing, but because a man who spent so much of his public life carefully managing every other aspect of his image has chosen never to engage publicly with the one recurring storyline the public keeps returning to. Perhaps the most striking contradiction in DiCaprio's public life involves the cause he has championed more consistently and more publicly than almost anything else: the environment. In 1998, at 24 years old, fresh off the success of Titanic, DiCaprio established the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, which has since directed substantial funding toward environmental conservation, wildlife protection, renewable energy initiatives, and support for indigenous communities working to protect their land. Over the years, the foundation has been credited with contributing to the protection of large tracts of rainforest and other vulnerable ecosystems. DiCaprio produced and narrated several documentaries on climate change, including The 11th Hour, Before the Flood, and Ice on Fire, each aimed at pushing climate science into mainstream public conversation. In 2014, he addressed the United Nations Climate Summit directly, using language that was, by most accounts, informed and genuinely passionate rather than performative box-checking. Environmental organizations and scientists have, over the years, credited him with doing more to popularize climate awareness among mainstream audiences than almost any other public figure of his stature. And then there is the other side of the ledger. Investigative reporting over the years, including pieces examining his travel habits, has documented a pattern of frequent private jet use, sometimes for trips spanning only a short distance, alongside vacations aboard large privately chartered yachts, both of which carry a substantial carbon cost.